Hi, welcome back to Maker Days. My name is Madison. This is Rebecca. If you have been in the shop, you know she is the shop manager extraordinaire, and she is also the EPP queen, and she is going to show us exactly how she accomplishes these absolutely stunning EPP quilts down here below. And if you don't know, EPP is English paper piecing, and she is going to give us the ins and outs of so many different techniques. Yes. So let's give it to Rebecca.
Okay. So English paper piecing is handwork. So we're going to be sewing by hand. So first of all, and I learned this the hard way, iron your fabric first before we start cutting it, because the one time I did not iron my fabric first, when I went to put my papers in the back and started gluing them, which we're going to get to that too, I barely had any seam allowance because of shrinkage. So, you know, live and learn. First, we're going to be doing just a little bit of fussy cutting. I'm going to show you that. And this doesn't have to be intricate. You can see on this quilt back here, I did some crazy fussy cutting, and we get these really cool kaleidoscope designs. But not everything is like that. Sometimes, you know, I just cut big open pieces. So it's whatever, how much you want to get into it. But let's look at this piece of fabric. So this is kind of a crazy design. There's a lot in there, and you might look at it and just be like, I don't know what to do with that. What do I fussy cut on that? I've got this tiny little template. You know, maybe I can do a butterfly or whatever, but no, you can actually go crazy and do some really cool designs. So this is one fun thing that you can get into, and it's called a magic mirror. And it does this. So I can lay this template. If I look at that butterfly, and this is going to make a 6-point star like on this quilt. I can get the idea of what that's going to look like, and I can kind of move that around. And it's like a kaleidoscope. It just keeps going. I don't know what you guys are seeing over there. So, and I was actually looking at this morning. Like, just if I cut these stems, this looks really neat. So look at how cool that looks. And so now when you are using a magic mirror, remember I do have seam allowance. So if I want to get that cut, I'm going to need to push that back a little bit and put my sticky magic mirror kind of where that would be. And that's actually how I would want to set that up. So, I'm not actually going to cut these. I'm just showing you that. That's a lot of fun. I'm working on a Christmas quilt right now. It is a bunch of these little trees all together. This I'm not going crazy with the fussy cutting, but I'm doing a little bit. So I want to line that up. Well, I'm going to ruin the tip up there.
Now, can you tell me the difference between this template that you have here that's open and this one here? Is there any difference, or just...
Well, some are a little bit better than others. These, when you get really big, and I gotta say, in this pattern, this giant, what is that? Is it a dodecahedron? Is that what that shape is?
I know, that's a lot of syllables.
Yeah, I know. That is an empty template, and you gotta be careful because it will have a little flex to it. So you gotta cut slow, don't go crazy.
Flex meaning
the
bias?
Well, the plastic might
Plastic flex.
not be as hard and stiff as when you have a piece that's solid.
Understood.
So just be careful. The smaller pieces are easy, but you want to watch your fingers, especially on this, because I can't hold it from the center. So just watch where you're cutting. You know, start here, make sure your hands are out of the way. Move to that side, try not to. I gotta say, I don't always cut these little corners. You can, don't have to, you know, there's a treat. Another thing back here, sometimes when I want to get really specific in my cuts, I just try to find a point I like. So if I was doing those stems and I wanted to cut the same piece out every time, I might make sure this little point is lined up with, let's say, that point, that little groove, and then line that point up with, like right where that flower hits. Because if I do that, And then I move up here and I'm like, okay, so I put that point right there and I put that point at the base of that flower. I'm gonna get that same cut over and over. Now, if I had crosshairs on this, then that would probably make it easier, but most of them don't come that way. So that's how I do it. All right. On the trees in particular, because I have a right and a left, to make it easy, because I will forget to flip my piece over, I have my fabrics folded together. I did iron those. And then I can cut my rights and my lefts.
So 2 layers
at the same time.
Wrong sides together.
Yep. Okay, so then we've got that. Gluing. Okay, so these are already ironed. Gluing can be a little bit more important than you would think. When you're gluing a piece, it's best if you always work in the same direction.
Doesn't matter which direction?
You are counterclockwise or clockwise, whatever works for you. Also, I'm using a Quilter Select glue stick. These work really well. Don't glue your entire piece to begin with, just do small sections at a time. So I want to really fold over on that point, working my way down.
And how tight are you making this? Like all the way butted up, or is there a little bit of a...
I usually butt mine up.
Okay.
Some people I've heard don't. I like it to be snug. I leave my last corner open a little bit, and I'm going to show you why. And then I do that. Not everybody does that. I do, because then it's all directional. And the reason is, when you pull these papers out, it's going to look crazy. And so I iron everything before I bring it in to be long-armed. But because everything is going in the same direction, these are laying to the side. You get less bulk than if if my point was like that.
It's almost like
so
nesting your
everything,
seams.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. This is all glued. This is all ready to be stitched. Some pieces are really easy to line up. Squares. Let's see. We're gonna match our corners up. Actually, did I knot this? We're gonna do a little quilter's knot.
Angie has lots of videos on this quilter's knot. Such a simple
that.
thing, but we forget.
Match my corners up. I'm gonna just hold this little flap out of my way when I get started. Now, when you start, I'm showing a whip stitch. You can also do a flat back stitch. I'm not showing you that today. My entire first quilt was in a flat back stitch, and I'm not great at it. I'm better at this stitch. So my second quilt, I did this, and my stitches were tinier and tighter. You do you, whatever works for you. I recommend you try them both, and you're gonna like one or the other.
Now, when you pick your thread color, are you picking for the, like you have pink here to go with these pieces, but your other square was blue. Is that just preference, or do you pick based on?
Well, I'm gonna pick one color or the other.
Okay.
And try to hide my thread as much as possible. You don't have to do that. Some people pick a neutral thread, like a light gray or a cream, and they sew everything like that. I find my stitches show less, and I hide them more when I match thread, and it's fun, and I like pretty threads.
Okay.
So this, because most of my pieces going all the way around are pink, I'm doing it in pink, and then I have to change less often.
Gotcha.
So you want to do it pretty small. The idea is to not go through the paper, but when you first start, you're going to go through the papers. When you pull your papers out of the edge, they might look a little rough, and that's okay. You can still reuse your papers. You'll get better. They'll get smaller and tighter as you go. And I mean, I don't know, I'm like, I think I measured it the other night. Like roughly 2 millimeters is what I do. And you don't have to. Like I Googled it the other night on how many stitches are you supposed to average in an inch in EPP? And I got 14 to 16, 12 to 15, 20 to 25, which seemed extreme, and I think mine are probably around like 15. So you're trying to just go across the papers and just catch the fabric on both sides a little bit.
And what size needle do you use?
I'm using an applique needle. An applique in number 10. At the moment, I am using a big eye because it's easier to thread. When I don't have a big eye needle, and we've also got some down there that are not big eye, then I use this needle threader because they're very, very tiny.
Great.
Another little tip, and I got this one mostly started. So that's really easy when you start putting things like that together, and I can hold those in my hands. When I'm matching up odd pieces together, it's easier like when I start, and this is actually a good place where something like a seam press comes in to really flatten these edges, because I have to kind of see where that paper is under there so I can make sure I line that corner up with this corner. And then that's a good place where I grab my sew tights and I put my sew tights on and I hold that in place to make sure I've lined that up. And then I stitch along. I'm a little bit picky on my points coming together, and you can see that in this quilt too. I don't want to see this point sticking out of the top here. I want these outer pieces to really close that gap in. So this is something I've learned to do. I'm gonna get one more little stitch up there and finish off that. So that goes all the way to the top. I'm gonna take this piece and I'm gonna lay it flat on that one and make sure it meets up everywhere. And in those corners, I'm gonna do one little stitch. And I'm gonna kind of lock that stitch in. And now I'm gonna swing that piece right over there. I'm gonna move that little flap out of the way. And I'm gonna start stitching down. So now that I've opened that up, I've enclosed my little tree up there, and I just like the look of that. So
It's perfect.
okay, so now that we start putting everything together, as we are sewing our EPP together, it's nice to take out paper, otherwise it gets big and bulky and stiff. So when I start sewing things together, I can start taking out some of my inner pieces. And this point-to-point turner is great. If I sit here and try to do this, one, it can shred your fabric easily, and it also is really hard on your hands. And I'm in my 50s, and that causes a lot of issues. So if I have this point-to-point turner, I can put this right under the fabric. And the Quilter Select glue is nice because it holds, but it's not crazy. And I can just go like that and run that along. And then I can get this point under here and I just pop that out.
And when do you typically take the papers out?
These trees, I'm taking out my center ones right away. But then once I start sewing things together, once I get these stitched together, and you want to make sure you've got all your areas covered. If I'm not putting any more on the top, I'll go ahead and take out all of these.
Okay.
So just as I'm sewing, what's ever enclosed in the seams back here, I start taking those out.
So if there's not going to be another piece sewn to it,
I can take it out, right?
Take the paper out. Okay.
Right. So with a lot of things like this pattern, I like to, and also the bloomers, I like to work my way out. So I'm going to stitch together my center pieces first, which I think that was these 4, and then I start adding and working my way out. For this, I did all of these blocks individual. This little cross was a separate one. And once I got everything laid out by color, I started stitching kind of just in rows, whatever works for you. But I like to work center out. Sandra was just talking about, she was reading reviews and she heard that some glues, the colors were bleeding through their fabrics. Now I've only always used Quilter Select glue because I worked here, and I've never ever had the issue of the colors bleeding through.
That happens a lot when people use glue meant for paper, not meant for fabric.
Okay. Yeah, and it washes off really easily, and again, you can peel your papers away from it really easily. You also had a question about, can you reuse your papers, right? Yeah, you can. And I've reused, actually, one thing you can see this paper right here. I've got glue on both sides of this paper because I keep pulling out my center tree and just putting it in to my next one that I keep doing. And again, when you first start doing EPP, you're probably going to catch the edge and sew through your papers a little bit. So it'll get rough. It's fine. You can still reuse it.
Well, like this kit right here, it's got papers in it.
Yep.
Will it have all the papers I need for the entire project, or am I expected to pull some out and reuse them during the project?
No, this kit is going to have everything that you need, and many kits will. I have recently come across kits that will say, you know, a quarter of a kit or a half of a kit. Because it lowers your cost on buying the papers, and so you can buy as many of those as you want, or you can reuse them. It depends on the quilt that I'm doing. If I want to do a full layout of all of my blocks first before I start sewing anything together, I want the full kit. If it's something like these where I don't need to do that because I'm just sewing trees together, then you don't need as many papers, and then you can reuse them. Because this is actually a pattern for a table runner. I'm turning it into a quilt. So.
What size thread do you use?
I like
Weight.
50 weight, and I really like Aurifil. I've used some other threads. The Aurifil is really nice, and it's really silky, and I use my Thread Magic a little less than what I would with some other brands that tend to tangle, and then I need to really use this.
Can I tell them about the thread story?
What is the
So when she first started English paper piecing, I had a whole, there was like 100 threads of a brand we won't mention that I didn't use anymore because I had outgrown it. And I was like, well, if you want this thread, you can have it when you're playing with it, because you can match all the colors. And then she needed a color that she didn't have in the box, so she bought an Aurifil thread, and she comes into the shop next day and she's like, why'd you give me that thread? I didn't realize that I didn't have to fight with thread so much when Aurifil doesn't knot and it doesn't break and it doesn't snap.
You had 3 brands in there.
I know. It was just a bunch of stuff.
It's a lot of great colors.
From when I had learned.
And I still have them.
Right.
And it's always like when I don't have a color and I have to use one of those, it's like,
do I want to go buy another thread, or do I want to use what I have? Yeah.
So Aurifil's really nice.
How do you use the thread stuff?
Oh, the Thread Magic?
The thread magic stuff. I've never used
My
it.
phone died.
Oh, awesome.
You just run your thread right across it. You can do that like once or twice. And it just conditions it. You know, it's like a wax, and it just makes it a little silky. So again, with the Aurifil is already really nice and silky, but not all threads are, and so it just helps it tangle less. Okay, so thimbles. Most of the time I don't need a thimble, but I do a lot of hand sewing, so you know the tip of my finger is a little bit harder right there, and I can sew for a long time and not need a thimble. But if I've really been sewing for hours on end, the needle will start to break into my skin. These are really good thimbles to use. They're just little teeny leather adhesive dots. You can reuse them multiple times. I've got one on the top of my needle case. I can just peel that off and stick it back on my finger. But because it's leather, it kind of molds to it, and so it's not cumbersome like a full finger thimble is.
Okay, so if this was, I'm walking in my very first English paper piecing project, what do I have to purchase on this table?
You don't need a big area to English paper piece. If you know, it's something you can take on the road. So you can get a call, and I think we have some right in front of you.
Yep.
Small cutting mats are really nice. You don't have to have anything gigantic. Ironing your fabric is really handy, and we've got some small wool mats down there. I usually set that up right next to my cutting mat so I can iron and cut back and forth. Having a good needle, so a good applique needle is really nice. Okay. You're going to need glue sticks for sure. And then the sew tights. I would say you need sew tights. Do you have to have a rotary? You don't have to. You can use scissors. You can cut your fabric with scissors, especially if you're not using templates. If you just want to get papers and put them on the fabric and cut around it, you can. And again, you're going to want the Karen K. Buckley scissors. They're micro serrated. They're super sharp. I mean, every quilter, no matter what kind of work you're doing, should have those. So.
Okay.
So I use papers a lot. That's just me. I like papers. You don't have to use papers. You can use print and piece fuse lights. Angie hates removing papers. I don't like cutting papers, but she will put all of her shapes on the print and piece, and you can run this through a printer too, but you don't have to. And so these are some of the things that Angie's been doing, and she's not sure what she's going to do with them yet. She is going to make a quilt. She just doesn't know her layout. This is a fusible. You fuse it on, you iron it onto your fabric, you cut around it with your seam allowance, and this is going to, it's you know, you can totally, it's
Pliable.
Thank you. And in the end, once her thing is completely quilted, you can wash this and it's water soluble, so that'll come out. So she doesn't have to remove the papers in the end. So that's a good product.
Does she need to cut the shapes of the paper, then fuse it to the fabric, or does she fuse the whole sheet?
No, she's gonna cut out her shapes on the paper first, and then she's going to fuse it on her fabric. So sometimes she'll come downstairs and she'll have a big piece of fabric and it's got, you know, like 50 hexes on there, and if I don't have anything going on, I sit and I cut out all of her hexes for her so she's ready to go.
But like that's a really good example for a template like this. I can use the inside of the template to draw out my shape, and I can use the outside of this template to cut the fabric. So like what I would do is I would cut the shape from the middle here, iron it onto my fabric, then click it back onto the paper and cut around it. So these windowed templates are really good if you want to use the wash away paper.
And you know what, you don't have to go into English paper piecing and make a giant quilt. So some smaller projects are, and you don't have to use a smaller piece like this either. You know, I did a table topper, and then I did some hand quilting on that. I did a little pillow sham. And we used these cool postcard little kits that have all different shapes and templates in them, and I just used it to make a pillow, and then got some pearl cotton and some sashiko needles, and I did some hand quilting on that as well. So
Very cool.
do whatever you want.
All right. Well, Rebecca is the EPP queen, and her tips are wonderful. If you have comments or questions, leave them down below, and we will make sure to answer those.
Thanks for tuning in today, y'all. Today was Maker Monday. It was English paper piecing with Rebecca. If you have questions or comments, you know where to leave those. Also, do not forget to leave us a like and subscribe to our page. And we'll see you next week for another Maker Monday. Bye, y'all.